All right, we are back today, Tuesday, September 6, 2022, with Miss Anita Arnold as part of our series about Anita Arnold and Black ink. So last time we talked about like your background growing up and how you were really kind of like math, science oriented. But then we ended our series talking about the musical group that you were managing and trying to get a record deal in LA, like your son being out there. So can you kind of talk about that? We didn't talk about like, did you get a record deal and then what happened from there?
No, we didn't get a record deal because, as it turned out, after I sent my son to California, then he could very well tell me what they were looking for. And what they were looking for was not what I had. And so that helped me. I could reshape the group and move forward if I wanted to. But by then, I decided I would not pursue the record deal anymore until we kind of proved ourselves in to my liking. And so so that was when I decided to start kind of at the bottom by taking them into upscale bars and clubs, that were going to lead to the same thing. And in Teaneck, New Jersey, and around up that way, closer to New York, there were places like that where when the football teams played, the football players would hang out. And one of the places they liked to hang out was a real upscale bar, and the lady gave me a contract to bring my group in and let them perform, and we'd go from there to the next level and like that, and then you would get in there and get yourself a deal. So I called the group together, which was Together Forever. And we had our understanding that they would come in and they would get dressed and they would be there 30 minutes earlier than showtime. And they would play. And the football players would come in from New York or from whatever other team they were playing. Well, don't you know, the first night out, I was there. We all had this understanding. And my group didn't show up 30 minutes before time.
Oh, no.
And the lady came by and she said, "Where's your group?" Well, it just happened it was raining that night, so I tried to fake it until I could make it. And so I said, "Oh my goodness, I hope nothing happened, because we were all leaving at the same time." They were coming in separate cars and I just drove over. Well, they didn't show and they didn't show. And then it was time for the show to start. And here they come rushing through the door, and the lady was just looking at me just rather suspiciously. And the lady that managed the place. At any rate, I didn't have time to chew them out because it was showtime. So they kind of got themselves together and, took the stage about 10 minutes late. And the music came and everybody was happy, and the football players, they were mingling and socializing with people. So I thought, oh, okay, well, we didn't get fired the first night. So we missed a bullet, So they decided that they wouldn't take a break. They just play all evening long, without a break because they were late. Mm-hmm. Well, that seemed to be okay with folk at the end. Don't you know that entire week we were over there, they showed up on time, one time. It was always an excuse about, well, I had to wait on him because he was ironing his shirt.
Oh my gosh.
All of that. by the time the week was over, the lady was so angry, she didn't even give me the check in person. She just left it there at the bar and said, "Don't bother to come back."
Oh, wow.
So this is when I found out the behind scenes and what you have to put up with managing a group. You know, particularly if you got 4 or 5 people in the group, and that's how many were in that group.
Yeah.
There were 4 to begin with, and they were really good.
Mm-hmm.
They knew they were really good, and they had played behind folk like Jerry Butler and, you know, folk like that, but they just never went forward with their talents because they didn't trust anybody to manage them.
Yeah.
Well, I was so burned up with them, and while we were having this talk, and I was chewing out about not being on time.
Right.
And they told me this Stevie Wonder wasn't. I said, "You are no Stevie Wonder."
Right.
So it was that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
So anyway, I said, just like the lady told me, "Don't come back. I'm not your manager anymore."
Right.
And they just couldn't swallow that, you know, because whenever I would go someplace, if they were playing there, and they would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, our manager just walked in." And I would say, "You need to quit spreading rumors.
Right.
I've already told you I'm not your manager anymore." But that was my brief encounter with managing and trying to get a record deal.
Yeah.
But I found out it's a tough business.
Yeah.
When I did get to talk to someone in New York rather than out in California about a record deal, when I first walked in there, the executive said to me, why is a nice lady like you in this nasty business?" And I said something like, "For the money." And he said, "Well, I don't know about this being the best way to make a living." So it was shortly after that there was another lady who was big in the industry, living up near New York, and she went out to get her paper or something like that, and somebody passed by and shot her dead on her own property. And I thought, oh, well, you know, I've been warned. Let me just put a period on this.
Right.
Period.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I was through with it. I said, it's not worth it to me. And then I started later on hearing stories from one of the guys that worked for me. He had worked for, you know, one of the big recording companies out of New York. And he just told me a lot of insane things, like they would, you know, get together for some party, you know, they were celebrating something, and they start fighting and pushing folk in the pool and all that. I thought, you know, I'm not, you know, I don't want to. Mm-mm. I just really don't want to do this. So that ended seeking record deals and managing groups. They come with their stories and their backgrounds. Yeah. And one incident that happened, we were playing at this famous place in East Orange, New Jersey called Peppermint Lounge.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of that place.
I know you have, if you've heard of Whitney Houston.
Yeah, I'm like, that's a legend.
Yes, it is. So we were playing there. This was before the record deal and all that. They were playing there, and the Al Boyce, I shouldn't call his name, but I'm going to call it anyway. Al Boyce was the really leader of the group, and he played the piano, and he was married, and he had a child, but I soon found out that he had children by the lead female singer in the group. Oh. And she was angry with him one time, and she wasn't singing with the group. He was just singing with the other female vocalist, himself and drummer, like that. Mm-hmm. And she came in the club, sat down, and when they started playing, she got up and went to the stage and snatched the microphone from where he was singing at the piano. She said, "That's my microphone, and you can't use it." And I thought, oh, gee, look at all this drama.
Right.
So anyway, I found out that it was not a business that I really wanted to go in like that.
Yeah.
I love music. You know, I thought, and I told you earlier that I was going to write music and I was going to do all of these things. But I tell you, managing Together Forever taught me that I didn't want to go down that path at all.
Like, not that side of the music business.
So back to corporate America.
Okay, so I guess there were remnants of your artistic side that you talked about in the earlier interviews with you doing piano and having aspirations to compose music. So it was still kind of there. But then after this experience with the band, you went back into corporate America?
Well, I was still in corporate America.
Okay, while you were managing the band.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, that was why he decided he trusted me, because I had this reputation of being such a great manager, you know, at the Fortune 500 company I was working for. And believe it or not, though, you know, we were talking about earlier about making lemonade out of lemons. Well, the Harlem YMCA always did this big fundraiser every year. Well, my manager at my job knew about it, and they honored. I better turn that off.
Do you need to get it?
Turn it off. Calls from Las Vegas. This is the friend. No.
Okay.
No. She was returning my call. She should have already called me back. Let me see if I can just turn this right up. Come on now. Okay. It won't ring anymore.
I understand.
Okay. But it was that very idea of me managing this band that got my boss's attention. And so the Harlem YMCA and sent out this notice to all these companies around the country, Fortune 500 companies mostly. And they gave an award called Black Achievers in Industry, Harlem YMCA Black Achiever in the Industry. So my boss just knew that if he submitted my name and what I did on the job, and I was managing this large budget, something like $1.6 billion on the job, and purchased data projects across the country, and then had nerve enough to be managing this little group.
Right.
He thought that was a winner. Well, he was right. He turned it in, and I was chosen.
Oh, wow.
You know, from this Fortune 500 company to go to this big deal. Yeah. It was a big deal. They had it at this hotel where Elizabeth Taylor always stayed when she came to New York.
Uh-huh.
And it was a 2-level penthouse at this hotel.
Oh, wow.
And she had this beautiful white piano that, you know, you could see if you were within sight of this particular suite at this hotel. It was beautiful.
Wow.
But that's where I met Andrew Young, who was then ambassador to the United Nations. And
why does that name sound so familiar?
Because he used to be mayor of Atlanta.
Okay.
And he was appointed by Jimmy Carter to be ambassador to the United Nations. Okay. And he was a speaker for the dinner where I was being recognized with all these other achievers from all these other big companies across the country. And it was grand. It was really grand.
Wow.
The dinner was like a 5-course dinner where you had violins playing, behind these courses. And they had a reception before, and the reception was just magnificent too. And then afterwards, you had another reception and after party,
Man.
and it was grand. But those people who were honored, by the Harlem YMCA, expected you to do something for the kids that came there.
Okay.
Because they had a lot of programming for kids, to try to keep them busy and, not let them have idle time after work, after school and that sort of thing. So I was thrilled about that part. So I decided that I would give these children an experience they never had before.
Mm-hmm.
So I told the manager of the facility where I worked that I wanted to bring the kids from Harlem down to Western Electric Company. That was the company I was working with at the time, and treat them to a day in corporate America.
Okay.
So I sent these limousines to pick them up.
Oh, wow.
And they had never ridden in a limousine. And so I coordinated with all of the different departments, there at the company. And so they got to time, the engineers had to come up with some engaging activities for these young people to learn a little bit about engineering and the company and what the company did. They treated them to a catered lunch. Wow. And so these kids, they were funny, but believe it or not, these grown folk in the company, they were just nervous. They were nervous the whole time the kids were there. Because if you saw the kids, you said, these little ragtag kids, basically. Aww. But they had never ridden in a limousine, and they had never, this was just brand new to them. Wow. And so I got to be real good friends with the Harlem YMCA, because of the things that I did for the kids.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's where managing the group led me to some other things within the corporation that were notable.
Yeah.
And so I truly enjoyed that, and was busy breaking the ice at that time with the company and reaching out in the community and doing something for children who were in school.
So your experience managing the band really created opportunities for you, not only within your work, but also kind of seeing how you work with community and curating these massive events and things like that. Because I think about what you did with your Western Electric Company and how something like that has really translated into the jazz festivals in Deep Deuce that you've helped curate. So I kind of see how these parts of you are being kind of rounded out and how it led to that. But before we get to that, how do you see that transition kind of taking shape? How did you eventually transition out of corporate America into this holy arts world?
Well, there was a step in between.
Okay.
So actually I was loving my job. When I lived on the East Coast, I'm telling you, I thought it was just the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I told you about the bright lights of Oklahoma City. Well, this was really good, because I left Western Electric Company and went with AT&T, the headquarters. And it was up there that I really was more partaking in the arts at that point. I loved going to these small little towns, that they had in New Jersey. Then I was finally glad that I moved to New Jersey because I had threatened my girlfriend that if this didn't work out, I was going to blame her. She told me I would love it, but I wasn't a believer at that time. But the early church was there, and I used to go on Saturdays, up there, and these little quaint shops with unique stuff in there. That was new to me. I thought it was just magnificent, and I couldn't believe I was standing in front of the early church that you read about in the history book with this tree. There's this tree, looks like it goes all the way to the sky. So, and these roots on the tree, right in front of the early church. I mean, it was just like a spiritual experience. And so I discovered a lot of those little towns, which make up our country's history firsthand, and for you to go in there and sit down and just meditate or just to sit there and marvel that you're sitting there, was just simply marvelous. And then, anyway, those things happened to me, and after I had been, selected to be one of the Harlem Achievers, when I went to AT&T, the company itself, the holding company, some of my peers, one of my peers in corporate America had never heard of the Harlem YMCA Achievers, and I was telling him, he didn't know his history. He was from Seattle. That's why he had been the real history about what happens. I found that people as far away as Seattle didn't really know all of the rest of this stuff. Coming out of slavery, and they had missed that.
Great Migration.
Yeah. So since my peer, he's deceased now, John Pryor, had never heard, I decided I would submit his name to the Harlem YMCA because I was friends with them by then. And so he was chosen, and so he saw firsthand because he was honored. And so we became real friends, not just peers in the same organization, but friends. And so I had told him that I noticed, particularly beginning with him, all this strange behavior in corporate America where African Americans were reluctant to sit with each other, during the lunch or break or the breakfast, in the morning you could go to the cafeteria. And they behaved as if though they thought Big Brother was watching and that there was a conspiracy. They must be up to something like that. They seemed to have that feeling. So you wouldn't see two African Americans sitting at the same table with others. I would come into the cafeteria, and John at that time, until I finished training him, would jump up and leave. He had to go back because he was working on a report that, any old excuse to jump up and not be seen at the same table together.
Wow.
And so after I had stunned him by turning his name in, and he became, a Black achiever in industry, then he calmed down and started behaving differently, like we were friends and it was okay to be friends. So, but the behavior was prevalent. And so I said, something's got to be done about this. And so he said, well, what do you think? I said, we need to have a conference. That's what we need to do. We need to talk to each other. And so he said, well, what do you have in mind? Well, I had some things in mind because this behavior in the corporation just wasn't acceptable to me. And so I started with John, and I said, well, we have to have a conference, but we have to get the right people in this little group. So there were 7 of us that we kind of got together. It was 6 at first, and then we felt like we had to have somebody from human resources in the group because we wanted to look at the data that the corporation had. and see where we were overall in the scheme of things. We already knew innately because I was there at the headquarters and I did meet other African Americans who were, there were two that were one level above me at that particular time. And I said, no, out of 1 million employees, this is the best. No, it's something wrong here. We got to straighten this out.
Mm-hmm.
And besides, they were talking about breaking up the Bell system, which they did do.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, we're the last ones hired, so we'll be the first ones out the door. And so we identified these other people. The guy from Human Resources, Ed Anderson, that was his name, I'll just say it. Both John and Ed are both deceased now. But Ed was a different kind of guy. He was in Human Resources and he had to report to all the vice presidents and president, what the numbers were and that sort of thing. So Ed, we approached him about joining the committee. He didn't want to do it.
Wow.
And I said, well, you got a choice. So I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So I said, don't come in and join us in this effort, and they're going to ask you about it, and you won't know anything. I said, or you can join us, and you'll know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can properly talk to the officers about what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're going to ask at some point, particularly when we have the conference.
Right.
So he knew when his back was up against the wall, so he said, okay, I'll join you. It turned out to be not only very helpful with the data, but he loved art. And when these famous artists, when they needed money, they ran out of money. And he lived in an area of New Jersey where a lot of artists live, visual artists and theater artists. But he would always bail them out. He'd buy their works. And he had quite a collection. You think, I've got a collection. You should have seen his.
Wow.
And these were famous people. And so he was the one that brought the art piece in when we finally got our group going. But what happened, we did have the conference. But before we had the conference, we were putting the final touches on it. We decided we were not meeting during the day on company time. We did it in the evening, but at one of the company facilities.
Okay.
John and I were at Parsippany, but we always met in Morristown, New Jersey. And so that turned out to be, a real good strategy because Morristown didn't have people in and out of there after hours. So we planned it. We decided to have it at Baskin Ridge, which is what we call Mecca for AT&T because it's huge and it has everything. It's equipped with everything under the sun that you can think of, which is not with the exception of all the stuff that they have at Bell Labs, which we definitely had a relationship with Bell Laboratories. But we decided to have it on the weekend at Baskin Ridge. And we would use the company facilities because they had the finest in the world. And so we decided to bring in a couple of people from other corporations like Johnson & Johnson executives. So we, laid it out with a panel discussion, the first morning, and then we break off into workshops. And we had different subject matter experts doing the workshops. And so just as we were about to roll it out, one of our committee members said, I think we should invite my senior vice president. And we said, no, this is a Black conversation for Black. we need to talk to ourselves and,
Right.
plan how we're going to exist after the mail system breaks up.
Yeah.
Because some folk are going out the door because you're the
Right.
last ones in here.
Right.
So he said, well, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. And we said, no, this is for us. We're going to have this conversation. And so we sent out invitations across the country because Ed had everybody's address.
Yeah.
Especially African Americans throughout the million people population that the Bell system had. He knew them all. So we sent out the invitations to fly into New Jersey for this big conference. And we were going to plan some things after that too.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were going to have some folk who did executive placement, and companies. So we had it all laid out how we were going to do it for that first year. And so Benny brought it up again. I think you need to invite my senior vice president. So I just went on and accused him of trying to make points with his vice president.
Mm-hmm.
And he, oh, no, he's really a good guy. He's really a good guy. So I said, okay, but he has to be the last speaker on the last day.
Yeah.
Because the conference was like Saturday and Sunday and concluding Sunday afternoon late. He has to be the last speaker. He cannot interfere with any of what goes before him.
Right.
So Benny was happy to write this letter to his senior vice president. Well, we had a little reception planned at a hotel that we had chosen for the conference hotel for those coming from out of state. Oh, we gathered at the hotel and we were having our little wine and champagne toast, and in walks this guy. And we didn't know him. He was not Benny's senior vice president.
Right.
So he went from one little group to another little group. He was checking us out. So I asked Ed, I said, now who is that? Oh, he's another senior vice president. Well, he wasn't invited here.
Right.
I mean, what's he doing? Well, he was checking us out and he was reporting back to the chairman and everybody else. Because they didn't know if we were going to march around the building.
Oh, yeah.
They just had all kinds of notions about what this was
Right.
and how it was going to end. They didn't see a good end to this.
Yeah.
It's based on limited knowledge.
Yeah.
That's what that was. So Bill Strissler, that was his name, came up to where I was. And I guess he had found out by then that I was the head one. And since I came up with the idea, they said, okay, you can chair this thing. That's what the other six said.
Mm-hmm.
He came up and he said, Anita, my name is Bill Strissler, blah, blah, blah. And he says, what's this all about? Why do you think it's necessary to have this conference? I said, I think it's a win-win situation myself. I said, I don't believe in win-lose. I just really don't relate to that well. I said, the company will benefit and so will we. I said, and if we benefit as employees, the company will benefit too. So he said, I see. And he moved on. So after he had visited every little group, he left. So we said, well, okay, we got past that one. The next morning, the conference was starting like at 8:30 or 9 in the morning. It snowed like, that snow was almost up to your eyebrows. It was so deep, yeah. So Ed, the one who was so fearful, he never had a card. He always rode the trains and then went to work like that. So I was supposed to pick him up at the train station. So he called me early and said, do you know it snowed last night?
Oh, no.
I looked out my window and sure enough, the snow was all over my yard and the
Wow.
driveway. I said, let me jump up with my shovel because you got penalized if you didn't keep your sidewalks clear and your driveway clear after the snow fell.
Oh.
And so they took care of the streets, but you had to take care of your property.
Yeah.
So there I was at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, shoveling snow.
Oh no.
Yep, from my driveway and the sidewalk, and making it clear so that it would all look clear by the time the snow plows got there.
Yeah.
So we struggled and we got there. I picked him up, we got there, and we were on time. And so in walks Benny's senior vice president the first day. And everybody was here. What are we going to do? I said, hey, the beat goes on. No changing the lines. We will not change one line. And so when Bill Bueller, who was the senior vice president, you close it. When he showed up with his galoshes on and his umbrella and his raincoat, he didn't say a word. He just went over and registered like everybody else was registering for the workshops. He picked which one he wanted to go to, and he stayed all day.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, all eyes were on him, to see if anything looked like suspicious. He stayed all day that day. The next morning, Sunday, the final day, he was there bright and early again. He registered just like everybody else. And at the end of the day, when he got up to speak, and this is exactly how it happened, the room was packed. They were mostly from around the country. It seemed like the New Jersey people were scared. The New Jersey managers, these were all managers in AT&T. They were fearful that their job might be in jeopardy. So very few of them came. A few came from New York, but the majority of the room full of folk came from Atlanta, from, just every place. We were standing there in the wings behind the curtain there. And he said, I want these 7 people who put this conference on to come out here on the stage. And Ed he was nervous because, I forced him. So he said, well, what are we going to do? I said, you heard the man. Come on out here on this stage. So when we walked out on the stage, everybody in the audience went like that because they didn't know what was going to happen. Well, the vice president said, on behalf of the chairman of the board, Charles Brown was his name. Everybody called him Charlie Brown. We want these 7 people to work with the officers of this corporation to create the new AT&T. And then that's what they said. And then everybody in the audience was saying, I want to join, I want to join, I want to join. And so that was this great endeavor, which was not my job, mind you.
So what was this new, what did it entail? Like, what would it entail?
Well, I will tell you what it did entail.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, everybody wants to join. Well, it wasn't anything to join. It was just a committee.
Yeah.
That we pulled together, and we just called ourselves the committee of AT&T, on the program, the committee of AT&T Black Managers. That's what the program said. And so, and I still have the program.
Wow.
Now, I don't throw stuff away. So I have all of that.
Yeah.
And that's part of my collection. But that was when we started meeting with the top officers of the corporation to plan the new AT&T, which included the AT&T Foundation.
Wow.
And so we had a series of meetings every month for more than a year before the breakup of the bail system. And the first thing that we did in meeting with these high officials in the company, the first meeting we had, they basically say, well, this is your show. You started all this, so what's our next step? So we decided we needed rules of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't going to do anything until we had the rules and understandings. And one of the rules that we had, maybe I'll say a couple of rules we had. Number one, we were going to ask for the data because they had it in human resources. And we expected them to give that to us. We were not going to speculate and go on projections and guesstimates. We wanted the data.
Yeah.
They agreed to do that. Then we went down, and I still have all my rules of engagement. And we went down the list, and one of the last rules was, regardless to how hot it gets in the room and how you might want to just jump up and run out, nobody leaves the room until those issues are resolved.
Okay.
So they said, okay. And we were off and running. And we asked for the data. We got the data. We asked for the data, all kinds of data.
Yeah.
Like how many African Americans did you have out of the 1 million employees? What were their ranks? Where did they stack up on the corporate ladder? All of those kinds of things. And then the very last meeting that we had, the officers were really dreading coming to that meeting because they knew the big question was going to be asked. And so we had worked around that. And meanwhile, we were having meetings because we were in charge of the agenda. And we had to give the information in enough time that they could respond and come to the table and talk about it.
Yeah.
So they knew where it was going, and they didn't want to be at that last meeting. But they came. And so sure enough, after everything was said and done, the question was, if African Americans are in the corporations, they are qualified for what they're doing, they have the right degrees, they're performing well, why is it that they're not progressing through this corporation to higher levels? And the room was silent.
So there was a definite, concrete ceiling for all Black employees, even if they were managers?
Yes.
Okay. So they couldn't be, they could have the capacity to be like a senior vice president or
not at
vice
that time.
president.
Oh, no, not at that time.
So what was the highest level you could go up to as a Black employee?
Well, look no further than Dallas, Texas. Sent Marshall down there. She was a president of AT&T.
Uh-huh.
She's a Black female. She is the CEO of the Dallas Mavericks. But that was after we had done all of these things. That was after the question had been asked, what keeps them from advancing?
Right.
If they're performing well, they got the right degree from the right school, and what keeps them from moving up? The room was silent. Nobody said anything. We knew it was coming down to this. They knew it too. They didn't want to be there, but we were there. And so Dick Dennis, he's deceased now, who was the top Black person in human resources. He wasn't like a vice president or anything, but he's still at the manager level. He said, let me phrase it to you another rephrase that. And he asked the question again. It meant the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they sat there. And he said, I don't hear anything. Is there an answer to this question?
Right.
We think it is. What is it that prevents that? And finally, one of them whispered and said, racism. He said, say that again. Say it. He said, racism. And he dropped his head.
Wow.
He said, good. You have acknowledged and confessed what the problem is. Now we can work on it and fix it. And it went from there. And so out of that effort came the first African American president of AT&T, and he was president of AT&T South Africa. They did outside the country first.
Okay.
And then they started. So Pete Reinhardt was not, a president, but Pete Reinhardt was he was the top visible African American. He sat on the board of AT&T, but he wasn't, like a president or anything. He worked for the company, but he sat on the board. And Pete didn't even want to be a part of this group. He thought he had enough hassle just coming in, getting to the board meeting, because the security would always stop him because they had the board meetings, on a weekend or whatever the designated time, and nobody was supposed to be there except board members. And he had to always go through a whole bunch of shakedown before he could get in the building to go to the board meeting that he was legitimately seated on. So we knew things had, and when we went to Pete to ask him, of course he had enough problems of his own.
Right.
But we gave him an offer he couldn't refuse either. So ultimately he was not there at the meetings going forward, but he did agree to work with us in ways that didn't threaten the other company officials.
Wow.
But we did a lot of things with that effort because there was a group at Bell Labs that had started an organization called Black United Fund.
Okay.
Well, the United Way, United Fund, later the United Way, they were all over the company. You couldn't work for AT&T anywhere, Western Electric, without signing up to be a member of the United. I mean, you had to make a donation every month to United Way, and they were not giving the money out. Well, one of the things that we accomplished, through this same group, was to get the company to let the employees have a choice about who they wanted to give their money to.
Yeah.
And so United Way over in New York, you should have seen the number of TV ads they ran because they were scared that they were going to lose all that money, which they did lose a lot. But the company, since we were meeting with them on a monthly basis to create this new AT&T, they put it to a vote. They gave an official response form that you could fill out, which included the National Black United Fund that started at Bell Laboratories. And I created a newsletter that went out to all of the Black employees and officers too, every month.
Wow.
And we profiled one of the officers, and he had to tell how he made it up the ladder. That was the format. So all of that work I did, that was not my job.
Yeah.
I just said we had to fix this problem.
Wow. So definitely like community organizing. It's just like it's there, But that's on a major level in corporate, especially thinking about corporate America. I mean, because even
That's right.
now, when you think about Black people in corporate America now in 2022, it's still
All
like,
of that came right out of what we did.
yeah, yeah.
Because they were having the same problem at Johnson & Johnson, and we included them on the panel discussion.
Mm-hmm.
We were there in New York. They were all headquarters up there. We just had them come on in there and sit on the panel and, say what they said.
Yeah.
And so that's how we did it. And so I told you, people were saying, I want to join.
Mm-hmm.
So we were then forced to create an organization. And at the high point of that organization, there were 33,000 members nationwide of African Americans that belonged to this organization. It changed names as the company changed names, which I thought was a mistake. But I was not there anymore because I had taken early retirement.
Okay.
I retired at 45.
Oh, wow.
And any rate, it was 2 years ago. I flew to D.C. The same group that Cynthia Marshall belonged to afterwards, and I had met her by then because my son, is the voice of the Dallas Mavericks and has been for quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
And so she had told him after she found out that I worked at AT&T, and she knew her corporate history. She knew, and so when I met her, she ran to me and just put her head on my shoulder and said, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you.
Wow.
I said, thank me for what? Because I didn't know her.
Yeah.
And she said, you kicked open all those doors, and I ran straight through them to the top.
Wow.
And then the Mavericks recruited her
To be there.
after she retired as president of AT&T.
So, what period of time was this when you were kicking open these doors at AT&T? Like, was it
Just before the breakup.
Brown or after? Like, as far as I'm thinking, like segregation, like, and keeping Black employees out. So, like, what time period was this when you were questioning, like, why do we not have senior level?
This was in the early 80s.
Early 80s.
It was in the early 80s.
So decades after segregation was illegal, was made illegal, they were still kind of.
Oh, they were very much segregated.
Yeah.
All over America. That's not new.
Yeah.
That's America's legacy.
Yeah.
Even in corporate America. They didn't throw. I think I told you that
Right.
when they hired me with an apology.
Yeah.
They said, we know you're qualified for so much more, but here, get out here on this manufacturing line, this assembly line.
Yeah.
And it took 9 years for me to get out of that circle. I mean, they kept trying to keep me there by promoting me down there on the floor in manufacturing.
But never beyond that.
Until I just got sick of them.
Yeah.
And complained, and then all of a sudden these doors just flew open because I had been doing all of the things that you're supposed to do in order to get there, and the doors were still closed.
Yeah.
And one of my professors out there at OSU said, Anita, you have to knock on the door. I said, oh, no. Me being naive, believing in the company. No, you don't understand. If I go and I make these A's, I told you I graduated on the prep, they're paying for it. They'll know that I'm at the top of the heap, so they'll just automatically, no, wrong.
Right.
They had to believe that something bad was getting ready to happen.
For them to actually do it.
For them to actually act like they had the right decision within them to just go ahead on it. It's just a decision.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Yeah. Wow.
But at the time when I left, 2 years ago, that's when I was saying I went to D.C. because this organization still is alive and well within AT&T, and they had a big meeting up there in DC, and I mean, everybody, Al Sharpton, everybody came
wow.
to the meeting, that whole 3 days. And they still have 11,000 members to this day. And that's my story about my corporate experience.
Wow. That's a pretty, yeah. It's like that corporate experience alone is a story. I mean,
yes, it is.
We haven't even gotten to the story yet. Like,
that's right.
But that's a story. I mean,
yes, it is.
Yeah. Just thinking about, like, I guess I've never really taken the time to think about the Black experience in corporate America during that period of time. I've always thought about, like, education, like going to school and stuff like that, but I've never thought about it in corporate America and people like you who have had to do all of this extra work.
Yes.
So that today folks that look like us can hold these. I've never thought of corporate America like that.
Well, here I am, and I've got all my paperwork to prove it.
Wow.
And that is another collection, as I see it.
Gosh. So how long were you at AT&T ultimately?
Well, when they finished piecing my time together, because I left the mail system at one point and went to work for the U.S. Postal Service.
Right.
And when I came back, I had to work 5 years before I could bridge my time, from the previous time.
Okay.
So by the time they got through adding it up, I think I had worked 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Because I started working when I was 19.
Yeah. And then early retirement at 45.
Yeah.
So did you end up staying in New Jersey?
No, I came back here.
Okay. So you retired in New Jersey and then you moved back to Oklahoma.
I was delusional.
You were delusional for moving back?
Yes, I've been watching Juan Perón. Evita was the name of the movie. And Juan Perón and his wife had an interesting story down there in Argentina. And I said, that's what I should do. I should go back home and give back to my, and help my community. That's what she did.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So anyway.
Well.
That was really what it was. And besides that, I said, well, when I came back to work for AT&T, the bell system, I said, I'm going to tough it out and stay these 5 years. But the 5 years had passed and they weren't letting me, retire. I was too young, they said. But after we put our plan in place, and the plan was under the new AT&T, instead of having 1 million employees, they were reducing forces down to 600,000. So they had to do something with 400,000 people. And so what they did, they started offering those who had been there 30, 40 years retirement. And they didn't want to do that. They wanted to they had it made by then.
Right.
They had these big salaries. They could hire 2 people, coming in for what they were making.
Yeah.
And so I thought, maybe I got my 5 years in, but, they didn't want to let me retire. Maybe I need to slow down a minute and not go to another company. But in fact, wait and see what they did.
Yeah.
So when they could not get enough takers to just leave because they had 40 years of experience with the company, I was sitting there thinking, oh, no, I'll never get out of here,
Yeah.
So then finally they got kind of desperate, because the plan wasn't working out the way they had anticipated. And so they started offering early retirement. And I said, oh, here I am. So they took the formula off. Okay. See, the formula had to be, at that time, in order to retire, you had to have your time plus your age had to equal 75. Well, I said I left at 45. I had a long way to go before that formula would equal 75. I thought, oh, geez. And then they took the formula off and said, anybody that wants to take early retirement. So that's how I left corporate America.
Wow.
And then I thought, okay, I'll sell my house and all these things, and then I'll come back to Oklahoma and I'll save Oklahoma.
That's what we all think. To be continued, right?
Yes.
I think that's a good place to stop today, don't you?
Yes.
Oh, thanks for talking with me today. And then when we come back, we'll talk about your move, your transition from New Jersey back to Oklahoma City.
Yes, okay. That sounds good.